I was born in the early 70s, and I'm beginning with that, with an excuse that my English is not so perfect, just because we were obliged to study Russian in Bulgaria. And in the turbulent times back then, I remember how my grandfather used to hide himself behind the heavy curtains in order to listen the free voice of the free world in his small radio. So by that time it was the Voice of America, the Bulgarian section of BBC, and the Free Europe. And as a kid I remember how carefully all of my parents and my grandparents told me not to tell this story outside the room behind the heavy curtains because we could be arrested if somebody knew that we are listening to the free voices. With all this story, I just wanted to tell you, as just Roger said, the fake news is nothing new. It's just a new form of propaganda. And the democratic world was not ready for its rise. And here we come with a guy. You probably don't remember Nigel Farage. He started his campaign for Brexit with us, the Bulgarians and the Romanians, as the heavy threat for the democratic world. Then it rises with the other immigrants. And his platform was totally fake news because it was proven by BBC research that the Bulgarians and the Romanians are added value to the British economy because basically the best part from our world was coming here to educate in the best universities and to work in prestigious firms. So this was the added value for the economy. But anyway, the guy started his famous Brexit campaign. Why did they brand it Brexit? We are all here a PR expert. How big chance do you give to a campaign for, basically, I don't know whether much of you know, but the name was the United Kingdom European referendum. So why did they brand it Brexit? Why not Brunited, for example? I don't know, I come to this from myself. Probably in the British government, there were a lot of experts who would choose to brand it Brunited instead of Brexit. And from my point of view, the battle was lost at a hello with Brexit. Then we come with one of the most famous lines of Brexit, enough of experts. And if this was a line only from the media, okay, but this was the line coming from the government officials. This is how the fake news becomes something very much institutional, and this is how it basically worked. Now, these days, I were asking some people here in Britain, how did I let it happen? And the answer that I received more frequently was, we didn't see it coming. I believe it so, but what I'm here to say to all of you is that we see it coming because we've been there and we've done that. This is the Bulgarian president, not the current one, but the previous one, the one that I've been advising because part of my career was to be an advisor for this president. We make his campaign together, his successful presidential campaign. And then I was working in his first interim government during the turbulent political times in Bulgaria. He has to appoint an interim government according to the constitution, and I became the spokesperson of his government. So when all this Brexit thing started to become real, he asked Cameron, do you know what is going on and are you sure you're going to handle it? And he said, don't worry, I got it covered. I've got some PR lessons in Oxford, so I'm going through. We all saw how he managed Brexit thing, and some words about Rosen Plevneliev, who is the former Bulgarian president. He is the first head of state who started to speak about the threat of Russia. and about the fact that we are in times of a new war called hybrid war, the one that basically we all live, the war of the post-truth, the war of the fake news, and the war of the alternative facts, as the President Trump called it. But this is all is not new for us, probably here. This is a Bulgarian dictator. This was the last Bulgarian communist dictator. His name is Todor Zhivkov. And this was the words he said after the Chernobyl disaster. You know, back then, at these days, it was a radioactive rain across the Europe. No one in Bulgaria knew about the threat. This was because we stay mute line was a governmental policy. So this is how the fake news basically ruled the entire country, and not only mine, but the entire Eastern European part of the world. This is the march on 1st of May in 1986, where the radioactive rain was the heaviest of them all. We all were there because it was, again, we were obliged to march to celebrate the 1st of May Day. I was there marching as a kid under the radioactive rain. This is how my hair became red on the next day. But it was not only the day that we were marching, we were rehearsing the previous day. And we didn't know that we are under the radioactive rain. So this is basically where the fake news become a governmental lie. And this is why I'm here to tell you that this is not only the tabloids who are the threat of the days, but the most important threat is when the government officials start to duplicate the fake news as a absolutely truth. So there is another funny story. Right after the democratic changes started in Bulgaria, this is the first so-called independent program in the Bulgarian national television, which by that time was the only one TV station in Bulgaria, state-owned. Now it claimed to be public, but unfortunately not very successfully transformed these days. And this is a students' program called Cuckoo. So they used the air of the national television and produced a program releasing the fake news that our electricity nuclear station in Kozloduy happened some accident there. So this is another very good example of fake news, using the only channel of communication for all the Bulgarians. By that time, the 100% of Bulgarians getting their news from the news edition. And the danger here was that they used the faces of the news presenters to release that fake news as a joke. But no one really realized that this is a joke, because the news was released by faces of news anchors, and they are translating the trust from the fake news to the reality. Now we are coming in the present days, and I'm going to introduce to your attention the maybe most influential person in Bulgaria. And why he is the most influential person? Because he owns something like 80% of the Bulgarian media. Yes, you heard correct. 80% of the Bulgarian media belong to this guy. His name is Delan Peevski. He is a politician as well as a media mogul. He is currently in the Bulgarian parliament, where he stands for the last 10 years. His career started when he was 23 years old as a deputy minister of ecology. Because of the scale of his business interests, including those in his mother's name, he effectively controls large parts of the Bulgarian economy. Like Game of Thrones, This story tale is all about money and power. Politicians are puppets or oligarchs. Oligarchs are controlled by mobsters. Banks are pawns in the game. And the people of Bulgaria pay for the corruption of their political system through stagnation and entrenched poverty. So this was the words that are describing the guy, and they're from Forbes. And this guy, the one with the white hat, is currently in the Bulgarian government. He is a coalition partner and he is extreme nationalist. So, the previous one, the fat guy, was elected as a chief of the security services in Bulgaria in 2013. This is how the biggest protests in Bulgaria since the democratic changes started. Thousands of people were marching on the streets, but the Bulgarian status quo decided that they have to stay in the power by any means. And this was not organized protests. The people had no leaders. But the propaganda machine needed to point it out one in order to discredit them. And I was pointed out as one of the leaders of the protests. I don't know why. Probably they see my political career or a potential of political career in me. So I become one of the leaders of the protest, and this is the media I created, called Noresharsky, and called Anti-Governmental Information Service, because by that time all the media were in a way were shutting down because they were working only for the status quo, covering only the status quo point of view. The protests were for about 404 days, and then the government fell down. We thought that the changes are coming, but unfortunately they didn't. So we ended up where we are standing right now. Basically, despite the fact that the Bulgarian media are controlled by this fat guy, we have well, this is how they call him officially. We have a state-owned TV, which never became public, and it's controlled by a Bulgarian government through the European funds, because this is a small market, and according to the recent studies, the Bulgarian market can handle not more than 2.5 national TV stations, and we have something like 4 and more, and they rely on the European funds. And this is how our biggest supporter became our biggest enemy. For example, when I was in the government, it was entirely dependent on my decision, and my decision only, to give to the media something like 70 million euro. I decided not to do, but this is not what the current government is doing, and he is buying the media constantly by doing that. So how did all that happen? The Human and Social Studies Foundation make a huge research in the Bulgarian media, covering the period since 2013 to 2016. And it was scientifically proven that both propaganda against NATO and EU started in 2013. And its average increase and peaks coincide with the search results on the subtopics of Crimea and Ukraine, the sanction against Russia and Russia's enemies. The turning point was the annexation of Crimea, whereby Putin's Russia explicitly asserted itself as a power player. After this, the time for translating Russian talking points into Bulgarian became shorter, then the aggressiveness and frequencies of their dissemination increased. The steep growth of anti-NATO and anti-American discourse followed Russian propaganda in response to the escalation of the sanctions against Russia, culminating in a record high around Russia's celebration of the first anniversary of the annexation of Crimea in 2015. So this study basically points the 4 main talking points, the four theses of the anti-liberal and anti-democratic propaganda in Bulgaria. and it clearly comes with one and the same, from one and the same point, and it's Russia. So we see the decline of Europe as the first thesis, and we can see that the peak there is during Brexit referendum. Thesis Europe, the EU, is sick with the virus of liberalism. That is why it is helpless in the face of the migrant invasion and the interests of the global capital. It is completely dependent on the global hegemon, the US, which is pulling the strings of its puppets in Brussels while deliberately unleashing the migrant wave that is inundating the peoples of Europe. The European Union is an artificial construction invented by the US and by the global elites, which, however, is doomed to fall apart so that the peoples would restore their sovereignty. These are all talking points extracted by the disseminators of the Russian propaganda, anti-democratic, and in its core, anti-liberal propaganda in Bulgaria. So if it sounds familiar to you, you will see all these things in your similar disseminators in your country, media disseminators in your country. The next talking point is the rise of Russia. And basically it shows Russia is rising again as a world political, military and moral leader. It is civilizational alternative to the rotten West. Everyone who criticizes or takes preventative and or punitive measures against Russia's foreign policy actions is its enemy or a puppet of its enemies. The third talking point is Bulgaria's venal elites. So you can exchange here Bulgarians with any other and just say on venal elites. All Bulgarian pro-liberal and pro-European civic movements and protests, all human rights organizations, they are foreign agents, Sorosoids, means funded by Soros, grant sponsors, etc. And the last one is the US, NATO as global hegemon puppet master. The thesis is that US and the US-led NATO military alliance are the world hegemon and the puppet master which behind the ideological smoke screen of human rights protection and through their puppets across the world are depriving peoples of their sovereignty. So all this you can see and follow on the other media, and the interesting point here is that all these peaks you see, they're following not the Bulgarian political calendar, but the Russian one. So what did I do? Another media. And I started a media called Terminal3.bg, and it's one of the, just for 2 years now, it became one of the most influential media in Bulgaria. We funded it ourselves. We are 12 found members, and we are probably the most influential people on Facebook and on the social networks in Bulgaria. So this is how basically the propaganda couldn't manage to spread through their troll factories their influence on Facebook, where we are the kings, and this is how the media survives. And this lion, this is not a stock. This, if you Google the lion, the Bulgarian lion cubs, you will see that basically the fat guy wanted to own these lion cubs, and there was a rescue operation for them, and now they're on Netherlands, and I played some role there as well. So one of the most interesting things in our media Terminal 3 are our cartoons. And one of the best cartoonists in Bulgaria working for it. The best cartoonists in Bulgaria have their own newspaper. It's called Press in Bulgarian, which means pig, because the other way we call this fat guy is pig. And this is their way to resist. This cartoonist started to work with Terminal 3 after he was censorship for one of the main TV stations in Bulgaria because of his cartoons over the Prime Minister. Now he has his tribune with the Terminal 3. So I just want you to see the last one. And so you can follow us in terminal3.bg, and if you need to know everything what is hidden behind the news, don't hesitate to go there and check. And last but not least, this is my balcony in Sofia. I live just on the other side of the parliament, and this thing is pointed at the parliament. The other interesting thing is that this street is called Boulevard Ruski. So this is the parliament. The one with the yellow brick is called the Boulevard Ruski as Russian. The monument you see is on the Russian king. It's called Alexander the Liberator, and most of the Bulgarians think that he is the liberator because he liberates us from the Turkish dependence, which is not true. This is again a fake news. He is the liberator because he liberates the villages in Russia from their burdens. And then you can see the church, the biggest one in Bulgaria, named after a Russian saint again. It's called Alexander Nevsky. Down the road, you will see another church, which is a Russian church. And at the end of this Russian way, you will end up with the Bulgarian government and president's building. So as you know, the Bulgarian now is sitting as a chair of the EU presidency, and yesterday all the EU head of states were in Sofia while I was here, happy for me, because the entire city was blocked. But they're going to the Boulevard Ruski to go to the president and to the parliament with all these Russian symbols around, and for 30 years nobody changed the names of these streets. And what I wanted to tell you is, yes, the threat of the Russian propaganda is rising, and it is not a conspiracy of us, the Eastern Europeans, that it is real, because at the end of the day you're out of European Union and we want to stay, so we'll have to do something. Thank you.